Hi, everyone. This is the last talk for the service and support track at Summit, sadly, I know. But Pat and Amaresh are here to talk about, to do a deep dive into automation rules in Jira Service Desk to kind of help you take your service desk to the next level. So just quickly, we have a few fun facts. Pat is obsessed with tacos ever since he tried them when he was in San Francisco, where we have really good Mexican food. And he also loves wakeboarding, and his dream job is to be a professional wakeboarder. And then Amaresh, he really loves coffee, and if he could, he would have it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the superpower he'd most want to have is to be able to turn water into coffee. So if everybody could please welcome Pat and Amaresh to the stage.
Right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for a deep dive into Jira Service Desk automation. I'm Amaresh. I'm a product manager for Jira Service Desk, and today I'm joined by Pat, who's a developer. So automation is really key to facilitate teams and processes to scale. That's certainly the case for JSD, too. And today we're going to talk about how we can best utilize the power of automation to really help streamline our everyday work, slowly making us all redundant one step at a time. So before I begin, I want to propose a scenario to you. Think of a task you need to do repeatedly, something that you really don't want to do. Really channel the hatred that you have for this task. Think of what you actually think when you have to do this task. If you're like most people, you're a go-getter. You like getting shit done. So you say, well, someone's got to do this, right? Might as well be me. Sometimes you just do what you got to do, right? But occasionally, you're feeling a little bit adventurous. You say to yourself, surely I can write a script so I don't have to ever do this manually again. And so begins the 5 stages of scripting. Let's see what that journey is like. It starts with belief. You've got so much hope, so much ambition. You can just picture all the things you're going to be able to do with all the time you're going to start saving. Maybe you'll learn to build a boat. Perhaps you'll learn to speak Dothraki. And so you get cracking. You've had 5 coffees. You've started scripting in Node.js. You're installing all the dependencies. You're 25 levels deep in callbacks. Nothing's going to stop you now. This seems like a piece of cake. Shoot. This is taking a bit longer than you thought. You're in some kind of rabbit hole of code. But you know what? You're still optimistic that you're going to be victorious at the end. I mean, it's going to take a little bit longer, but you're still going to get there at the end. Day 671, still coding. Oh no, this is bad. Things just got a lot worse. Maybe you should have written those unit tests. By now, you've definitely spent more time trying to automate than the time you'll actually save. But you know what? This is your life now. There's no turning back. Even though you won't necessarily save time, at least you've still got a job at the end of the day, right? I mean, I think that's how this works. But what if I told you there was another way? This is your last chance. After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up in your bed, and you keep writing scripts and automating things the hard way. Or you take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and we'll show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Automation in Jira Service Desk. Whoa. So half of all projects today already use automation. What we really want to do today is make that 100%, because we really believe that every single project can benefit with the power of automation. For the 50% that do already use automation, we really want to make sure that you use it to its full potential. So how does automation actually work? It's really simple. It's split up into 3 components. You've got the when something happens. If certain conditions are met, then do a particular kind of action. So the way that translates is that you've got triggers, filters, and actions. A trigger is simply what causes the rule to fire. So it could be something like an issue being created, comments, SLAs, or linked issues being transitioned. Then you have a filter. The filter decides which issues the rule will actually act upon. So it could be a JQL on an issue, or it could be something depending on the comments or the user type. And then lastly, you've got the action, which is what the rule will actually do when all the conditions are met. So it could be something like transitioning the issue, or adding a comment, or something even more advanced with webhooks. So a really simple application could be something like when an issue is transitioned, if it's transitioned to done, then order a glass of wine. And that's actually possible with Jira Service Desk. So where does automation live today? It's under project settings in your sidebar, right under SLAs. Clicking on that gives you this. This is the space where you configure and view all your rules. You can add a rule using this button at the top. And once you click on that, you can pick one of the templates that we provide out of the box, or start with a custom rule and configure it from there. This is what configuring a rule looks like. You've got the when block, the if block, and the then block. You can view all the times a rule has been triggered and whether the then action was actually executed. And you can also drill down and see what conditions were met when the rule was fired and which weren't. And this is what it looks like on server. For those of you running cloud, here's what it looks like on cloud. The design looks different, but under the hood, the functionality is pretty much the same. Given the majority of the audience today is on server, we'll primarily be using server screenshots for this talk. So what are we going to talk about today? We'll split up today into 4 sections. I'm going to be covering the external customer service use case and the software support use case, which is, of course, Jira Software integrated with Jira Service Desk. And then Pat's going to be talking about internal IT teams, and we'll also look at advanced applications with webhooks. So let's start with external customer service. You've got a large number of customers raising tickets. You've got multi-tiered support. So your first level is probably triaging and then resolving, or sometimes escalating tickets for your second level support, and so on. And so the request lifecycle essentially boils down to issue creation, the triage, working on the ticket, and then resolving it. So let's start with issue creation. Tickets can be created in many different ways through different channels. It could come in through the portal. I mean, portals are great because they force structured content. But if you're like most customers, they come in through email. And emails are also great for our customers because they're easy, it's familiar, and customers really love using email. But the drawback is that it doesn't necessarily force structure. So let's say that someone's raising a payment request, and they don't give you the complete picture right away. Your agent needs to follow up with them. So you follow up with them asking for the transaction number. And then they need to reply back, giving you that transaction number, and on and on. So that's just really not fun. You really want to avoid that back and forth. So you can automate that. What you do is you can set up a rule for when an issue is created. If the summary contains payment and the request channel is a particular type, you can send an email asking for specific information about that transaction in this case. So the beautiful thing about this is that it's really making sure that your agents get the complete picture right away, and you don't spend any precious time going back and forth. The other cool thing about the then action for sending an email is that it's heavily customizable. You can exactly specify who the email is going to go to, and in this case, it'll be the customer. You can also configure the content using variables. So for instance, you can throw in the issue summary, the description, and even the portal name if you wanted to. You can also use the customer notification templates to make sure that this is consistent with all the other emails that are coming from you. So with a few minutes of configuration, you can send customized emails like this to your customer. effectively saving the precious time your agents currently use gathering information from them. So now it's time for triage. It's super common for customers to route their work to agents looking after a specific organization. Let's also remember that Service Desk can actually help keep track of these organizations. So what you can do is define a customer organization entity which has different customers that belong to it. And then what you can do is set up a rule that when an issue is created, if the reporter is from a specific organization, you can then directly assign the ticket to the agent that is looking after that particular organization. Of course, when an issue is in progress, automation is also super beneficial. So when an issue is in progress, time is of the essence. Time is crucial. You need SLAs to create a certain level of urgency to help you prioritize your work. Just a really quick reminder again that SLAs can live inside queues, and they can help you prioritize your work directly from here. SLAs are also incredibly granular. So you can specify exactly when you want the SLA to start, when you want the SLA to pause, and when you want the SLA to stop. So a really simple application of automation with SLAs could be to do with escalation. You want to bring in the right person, the right support staff for the right issues, especially the urgent ones. So what you do is you set up a rule for when an SLA is about to breach. For instance, if it's due in the next 60 minutes, and if it's a crucial issue, bring in the right person. You can bring in your support manager directly. Agents are busy. I mean, there's so much work to do at any given time, and sometimes it's really hard to stay on top of your work. You can use automation for that as well. What you can do is set up an SLA to measure the time in progress that starts when an issue is in progress and stops when an issue is closed or resolved. So the automation rule here could be when an issue has been in progress for an extended period of time, and if you are the assignee, then remind yourself to update the customer. This is really brilliant because you want to make sure that your customers have the right expectations and are constantly kept in the loop. So that comment, just like sending an email, is customizable. You can change the visibility of the comment and the content. So of course, you can say that I've tagged myself here 3 times, and so I'm definitely not going to miss this comment. And I also probably don't want to make it visible to the customer. Just like we need reminders to stay on top of our work, our customers sometimes need reminders too. Sometimes we're really close to fixing something, and we just need that extra piece of information. So we follow up, but our customers sometimes forget to follow up with us. Well, you can also automate that process. You can set up an SLA for time in waiting for a customer response, which starts when an issue is waiting for a customer and stops when the issue is no longer waiting for a customer. And what you want to do is have a rule which essentially tracks how long an issue has been waiting for a customer's response. And if that period is an extended amount of time, you can then leave a comment following up with the customer automatically. This could, again, be a then action for an email, or it could just be a comment. Lastly, we've got resolution. So once again, when it comes to resolution, sometimes you need to follow up with customers, and sometimes they just don't ever reply back. And so what happens is that you have stale tickets lying around in your backlog. So what you can do here is set up a rule for when an issue has been in a fixed status for a long time, and if nothing has happened on the request for an extended period of time. And so you can do this using JQL and request lost activity time. Then you transition the ticket to close. So now I'm going to talk about software support. In particular, how to use automation with Jira Software and Jira Service Desk. So if you've got a software team, you've got a set of customers who are raising tickets for your agent. The agent typically lives inside Jira Service Desk, and you have a developer inside Jira Software. The request lifecycle essentially boils down to the same thing as I showed earlier, starting with creation. Software is buggy. You don't need me to tell you that. everyone knows that. So how do you stay on top of known software bugs? Well, when an issue is created, if you can check the description of the service ticket. And if it contains a specific error code that you're well aware of, well, then link the known software bug that's tracking this. This is great, because your agents, it instantly informs your agents about known issues. And this is also great for your customers, because they instantly get an expectation that, yes, this is something the team is already looking at. Now, the edit then action can also be used to specify exactly what issues you want to link to. And of course, the link type as well. Looking at triage. Sometimes feature requests come in, and nobody really needs to look at that. Those can be directed straight to your product manager. You can do that when an issue is created. If the request type is feature request, then assign it to a product manager directly. Thirdly, we can look at progress. Agents love documentation. I mean, having an internal knowledge base is perfect because you want that information at your fingertips to really act right away. But with volume, things get really messy. And so what you can do is use automation to really streamline that by having a rule for when an issue is created. If the affected version matches 2.0 in this case, then leave a comment with a link to the documentation. So no longer does your agent need to go through the process of finding the right appropriate documentation manually, but has that directly in the ticket. But of course, sometimes the agents can't really solve the problem themselves, and they need to escalate it to a developer. So you can automate that escalation. What you can do is set up a rule that when an issue is transitioned, if the status is escalate to dev, then assign it directly to the developer. Once the developer is assigned, this is what happens to a lot of teams. The agent ends up becoming the middleman, communicating from the developer back to the customer, from the customer all the way to the developer, and that's just no fun. So with the power of some magic move and the Jira Software integration with Jira Service Desk, this is how it can be. You can have developers in the same loop as your customers. What you can do is set up rules for when a comment is added. If the status of the issue is being looked after by the development team, then directly alert the developer of the update. This is really important because sometimes customers leave additional information on the service ticket, and your developers need to know that because that could be the one thing they need to know to fix that issue. Just like agents, your developers also need to stay on top of SLAs. So when an SLA is about to breach, and if it's being looked after by a developer, then alert the developer that this is something that needs to be looked after ASAP. Lastly, automation can also help with ticket resolution. We know that this is how a lot of teams work. You have one core software issue that is linked with multiple service requests coming in from your customers. So you can set up a rule for when the root linked software bug is transitioned, and if it is affecting service desk tickets raised by your customers, then close the link tickets with a comment letting your customers know that this software bug is now resolved and their problem should be fixed. Here in this example, for the if condition, we're using the link type match caused by or is causing. The great thing over here is that you have one resolution that's triggering all of the follow-up resolutions. So now I'm going to pass it on to Pat, who's going to cover internal IT teams and more advanced applications with webhooks.
Thanks, Amarish. So you've seen external customer support and automation with Jira Software. So let's take a look at our last scenario, which is internal IT teams. So this is your classic IT help desk. Typically, it's a small team of caffeine-powered badasses like Amarish who provide support for internal hardware and IT systems. And quite often, there's a manager involved who might be acting as an approver or a participant in some capacity. And we, of course, have got one of these at Atlassian, and it's called Atlassian IT. So let's step through the lifecycle of requests in an internal IT help desk, starting out with creation, as always. So consider a scenario where a new request arrives asking for help with our two-factor authentication system, which is called Duo. This is a real-life example, and it's something that happens all the time at Atlassian. It happens often enough that we've written knowledge base articles about it inside Confluence, just to help deflect requests before they get raised. And there's plenty of places in the customer portal where a customer could have discovered those knowledge base articles, and in an ideal world, the request would never have been raised in the first place. But it's inevitable that some of them are still going to slip through the cracks. So one way you can improve here is by examining the content of the request. And if it appears to be something that you have a knowledge base article for, why not immediately reply back with a comment containing a link to that knowledge base article as a final attempt at deflecting it before it reaches the agents. And we can achieve that extremely easily using automation. So when an issue is first created, if the summary contains duo using the JQL tilde operator, or contains, then comment back with a link to the knowledge base article. So take, for example, what Atlassian IT have done with their knowledge base article for duo. It's just a really short, friendly imperative trying to empower the customer to seek help for themselves, check out the knowledge base, and if that doesn't help, come back and we can help you out. So we actually interviewed Atlassian IT about their usage of this pattern, and they found that it deflects roughly 20% of Duo-related requests, and that's not even counting the ones that got deflected when customers discovered the article throughout the portal. And that's pretty crazy if you think about it, 20%. If you do that for a few other articles, you could potentially save your agents quite a bit of time. As we know, the next stage of the ticket lifecycle is triage. And there's a couple of automation rules that we find particularly useful for IT teams in this scenario, and those are related to priority setting and incident notification. So first off, priority setting. It's no surprise that more often than not, help seekers and especially software customers raising bugs might think that the priority of their tasks are higher than maybe what the software team thinks. And this can make the priority field somewhat redundant when the agents need to go back and re-triage inevitably. So rather than providing customers the ability to set the priority field directly, teams are finding that it's actually more effective to introduce additional request type fields to gather more discrete pieces of information, which they can then use to set the priority automatically. And this is done through the if clause of an automation rule. So the secret sauce here really is in the JQL. So when an issue is first created, if it's an outage, and the product is Jira, for example, then set the priority to critical. And you can combine this with other automation rules. For example, if the issue status changes to triaged automatically, and the priority is critical, then we can trigger a PagerDuty notification, or Ops Genie, to notify the person who's on call for that service. So once the request is triaged, agents pick up the ticket and they begin working towards resolving it. For the in progress stage, we find that custom shortcuts, automatic approvals, and priorities, context providing automation rules to be particularly helpful. So first off, custom shortcuts. When working on tickets, agents often find that they repeat themselves. They write the same kind of responses over and over. They save responses in notepads, they'll paste them in from Confluence. Some people even have Chrome extensions to manage them. And automation can actually be used to help avoid this sort of repetition and be used to implement custom shortcuts by detecting particular commands from within internal comments, for example. So an automation rule can then respond to the customer as the agent. So in this example here, we detect the presence of a particular command in a comment, which is :kbduo, and then respond to the customer with a link to the knowledge base article. And you can, of course, extend this to trigger other things besides just commenting back. It could trigger a webhook and have some effect in the real world, for example. But what about requests that require approval? So for example, a hardware request or a deployment. And this is extremely common in change management scenarios. So take, for example, if an employee raises a request to provision a new EC2 instance inside AWS. So depending on the size of the instance and the price, the request might actually require approval from a manager, which would be implemented using the Service Desk approvals feature, of course. But for trivial cases, it's pretty common for a manager to be wondering, why do I need to approve this? If it only costs 5 cents, why don't you just buy it? Obviously, it's good to keep the ticket around for auditing purposes, but maybe we can automate the manager out of the picture in this case. So as it turns out, there is actually a trigger for when an approval is required and a corresponding then action to automatically approve it if necessary. So we can use this to solve the problem as described. When an approval is required, if the request type is provision EC2 instance and the type is small or the price is low, then automatically approve the request and automate the manager out of the picture at this point. They'll be notified, but they didn't have to intervene. They can address it at their own pace. This could also be used for non-IT teams, for example, an HR team. So for example, at Atlassian, leave approval is only required if it's more than 1 day. So we can automatically approve those leave requests as they come in if they're just for a single day. It's super versatile. Another interesting use case for automation is to provide context. So this could be in the form of approver context. For example, if you're a new manager, you might come to the help desk. Somebody's asked you for approval. You don't actually know the guidelines or the rules on how to action that approval. It's easy to see that a little bit of extra information right at your fingertips would be really useful there. Or alternatively, it could be employee context. So for example, if it's support for internal hardware, a full list of what pieces of hardware that employee actually has might be super useful as well to have at your disposal. So for approver context, we can simply detect when an approver is required, check the request type, and then automatically leave some instructions for that approving manager to have a look at if they need it. So when an approval is required, if it's hardware request, then leave a comment. Similarly, for employee asset context, when a ticket is created, if the type is IT help, then call a webhook to link back all asset-based tickets. And you can reuse this particular pattern for pretty much any scenario where context could be automatically retrieved and added to an issue. It just makes it easy for the agents to work on the tickets as they go about their day. Now we come to resolution in an IT context. In some cases, it's pretty common that an agent thinks they've resolved the case, but the customer comes back and says, hang on a second, still having trouble. This has led Atlassian IT and many other teams to actually create 2 resolved statuses. So one when the agent thinks that the ticket's resolved, and then an additional one, closed, when the ticket has been confirmed as finished. The one for resolved is so that particular SLAs can pause, like waiting for customer. It's not necessarily relevant anymore. But to make this work, a customer really needs to be able to reopen the ticket. So we recommend automating this simply with comments. So when a ticket is commented on, if the status is resolved, then transition it back to in progress. You should also note here that there's an additional if condition, which was comment was the primary action. And this is really important to note because it's actually possible to write comments during a transition. So if you're going to go from like in progress to resolved and you leave a comment at the same time, it might automatically bounce back. So definitely take note of that one. And that ties off our exploration of automation in particular scenarios. As you can probably ascertain, there's clearly endless possibilities for this feature, and you can combine it forever and talk about it for hours. But there's one thing we've mentioned a few times throughout the talk, but haven't really spoken about it in any detail, and that's webhooks. So this is where automation gets really, really deep, and the door opens up to virtually infinite levels of customization, but the hand-holding kind of stops here. But just a heads up, it's going to be a little lower level, and we're going to go through it relatively quickly, but there's documentation everywhere, and I think you got this. So all the content's available online. There's heaps of documentation on developer.atlassian.com, and you could digest it at your own pace or rewatch the video. But what are webhooks, and how do you actually implement them? So in essence, from Service Desk's perspective, a webhook is just a special then action. But rather than interacting with part of Jira, a webhook speaks to the outside world by firing an HTTP or HTTPS post request to a particular URL that you can supply when you're configuring it. So this gives Service Desk the ability to communicate through remote services to the outside world in response to events that happen within a project, like issue-related events, like triggering PagerDuty notifications or OpsGenie. You could be communicating with an application inside AWS, like starting a deployment or calling a Lambda. Could send someone an SMS using the Twilio API. It's not just technical teams. You could print some documents. Amaresh has probably got one to order a coffee. But what do you actually need to build a webhook? There's really just two key ingredients, and that's you need an automation rule. That's configured through Jira Service Desk. It just needs to actually call the web server after some event happens inside the project. It's just your typical when, if, and then that we've gone through 30-odd times. But the then action in this case is webhook type. And secondly, we need a web server. And this server needs to understand and process a request that comes from Service Desk in response to an event in the project and perform some action like sending that SMS, printing that document, that kind of stuff. For the web server, you can pretty much pick your tool. It's completely up to you, but it could be Node, could be Flask, could be IIS, as long as it listens on port 80 or 443 and does something cool. Whatever you decide, though, for Service Desk Cloud customers, the web server needs to be accessible from from the internet, basically. And if you're a server customer like most of you, it needs to be accessible from your Jira installation so that it can communicate. Even if it's within your DMZ, it should be fine. But once you've got that web server and it's doing something in response to the post request, it's time to configure it. And you can find webhooks in the same place as all of the other then actions. It's just over here. But there's a few configuration options that we're going to go through. So when you click on that, you get given a dialog for configuring the webhook with a few different options. The first being the URL. This sort of speaks for itself. It's the URL that gets called when the webhook is executed from the trigger and it matches the conditions. All the body gets sent over that way. Second option is you're able to send additional HTTP headers along with the request so that you can use this for interoperability, authorization, like rudimentary security purposes, or validating that the request actually came from Service Desk. That's pretty common with a pre-shared key or something. And the final option is a little checkbox that says payload, and that's under body. And you use this to ensure that Service Desk actually sends along the issues details in the payload, in the actual body of the request, to your web server when, in addition to the HTTP headers, when the automation rule is fired. And this is what that body looks like. You can see it's got all of the issues details, like it's got the key, it's got the ID, it's got the webhook trigger time, it's got all the issues fields, including custom fields. But as with any automation rule, all of those fields are subject to the permissions of the user that executed the rule. So if you're finding that a particular field isn't showing up, like a normal issue field or a custom field, then the first thing to check is who's configured to execute the rule and what permissions do they have. But what about customization? So for a native webhook, you haven't got a lot of control over what information gets sent through that payload. It's effectively just fields and custom fields. As we just went through, this is what the config page looks like by default. But what if you wanted to recycle the same SMS webhook, for example, 3 times, each time sending a different message to a different recipient? So clearly the interface doesn't facilitate this very easily. You'd have to do it through the headers or some kind of magical hack like that. You can't commercialize it or share them with anyone else either. Ideally, you'd want to be able to introduce fields like this to actually collect that information, like the recipient and the message you actually want to send. And conveniently, Atlassian Connect lets you do all of this. Behind the scenes, it is effectively just a webhook when we're talking about automation rules. And let's take a look at how this actually works. You've got the same set of requirements as you do with a native webhook. You need an automation rule, standard. You need a web server to actually do something. But now we've got a third requirement, which is that web server needs to supply some HTML. And Atlassian Connect will take that HTML and use it as the then dialog when configuring the automation rule. So it'll be stuck in an iframe. So if you think back to the then dialog that we showed before, all the fields shown on this screen are being rendered from the webhook server inside of an iframe, excluding the confirm button and the cancel button. So you provide all that interface, and all those details will get sent along with the request to the server. So once you've written that HTML, you need to actually configure Service Desk to create the new then action under automation so that you can select it from the list. And you do that using the Atlassian Connect JSON descriptor. And this is a standard descriptor across all of the different Atlassian Connect apps. And The modules differ depending on what you're trying to do. So in our case, we're trying to create an automation action. So under modules, we've added automation actions. This just indicates the service desk that we want to add a new then action. And there's two important values under there that I want to call out, and those are the webhook URL, and this is what gets called when the automation rule is triggered. It's just the same URL as with a native webhook, and the config form URL. So this is the URL which renders the iframe that configures the webhook inside the then action. So once you've done that, you can finally configure a rule like this. So when an issue is created, if the priority is urgent, then send an SMS to a particular number containing a particular message. When it's finally triggered, the server on the other end will receive the stock standard payload that you saw before, but this time it contains an additional block, additional JSON map, with all of the information that came from the front-end configuration. So here you can see it's got both the number and the message that we sent through. And once the server receives and executes the process, SMS received, voila. You can use this to extend, commercialize, and share your webhooks. And there's a number of them available in a bunch of different apps on the marketplace today. Like sending an SMS is available there. That is missing some slides. Sorry. If you want to know more about webhooks, there's actually a really great YouTube video created by one of our product managers. So if you search for Jira Service Desk APIs Unleashed, it should come up, and you can find basically a whole bunch of inspirational ideas about what you can create with webhooks, and heaps of details about the API itself. Developer.atlassian.com has got a heap of information as well. Pretty much more information than you could possibly need, all the details. So I'd recommend you go checking that out as well. Just gonna scan through, yep. Developer. But it should be fairly clear by now that automation is an incredible tool that you should definitely add to your service desk arsenal if you haven't already. So if you're part of the 50% of customers that aren't already using it, I would say that you guys have definitely got the most to gain. Just give it a try, I reckon. But in either case, if you are using it or if you aren't, next time you log into Service Desk, I'd encourage you to go straight to automation under project settings and build something cool. Or if you're already using something that we haven't mentioned, I'm sure we'd love to hear about it, so come and let us know and share. And if you see us around Bash, say hello. Thanks for checking it out.
Does anyone have any questions?
Hey, hello. So I have actually two questions. First one would be if you plan to add more triggers in the futures. I don't have something that comes in my mind now, but I know that sometimes I was like, something is missing here. And the second one is you showed us like based on an SLA that an agent or somebody like an individual can be notified. But what about a group of individuals? Because for us, this is something that we need, because you can imagine, for example, that agent might be in vacation, so he's notified, but nobody can take the action.
Yeah, right. So first question, are there any automation rules planned for the future? I know that there is some available in cloud that are not available in server, so I'm not sure. Are you a cloud customer or a server customer?
Data center.
Data center customer. Our service desk server PM happens to be here actually, so you might be able to comment on that one.
Hi, I'm Vidhu, the PM for JSD Server and Data Center. Yes, there are plans in increasing what the triggers can do. While I can't give you a timeline or exact date, but we have received a lot of feedback from customers today and yesterday that they want to do more with automation. So there are definitely plans to increase the automation capabilities with Jira Service Desk. For question 2.
Oh, question 2. Probably. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any way to mention a group other than typing them in specifically. But that's certainly something.
So yeah, one thing you could do is have multiple users be notified, but yeah, come and talk to us afterwards, and we can see if there might be a better solution that perhaps we're not aware of.
Any other questions?
There's one in the corner.
Hi, quick question on the automation rules. So do you plan on implementing other than post requests, such as get requests, to get feedback from other systems to interact with Jira issues?
So are you talking about external
Webhooks?
triggers, essentially? The automation rule being triggered by an external system?
No, the other way. So automation with poke another system with a get request to get some content, like JSON content, maybe to feed the issue in Jira.
Oh, so you can actually do that with a post request. So the action that it gets executed inside the webhook server through Connect can then go back and affect issues within the system. Would that help your situation?
Yeah, kind of, but some APIs are only accepting get requests, for instance, so that was my
I'm not aware of any plans to do that, but that's a good point, something we can consider.
All right, thanks.
Hello. Assuming a multi-level scenario where there is a customer, a first level of support, a second level of support, and a developer or a team, okay? My question is, assuming an issue that moves between this level, is it possible with Service Desk to track the SLA or how much time the issue remain in every level?
Would you be able to repeat the question? I didn't quite catch the first part of the contextual part.
Assuming there is the customer that open a bug, and the triage of the bug, it's based on a first level, the first level, a second level, and then the team that develop a bug, that a fix for the bug. And every level has a different SLA.
Right.
Is it possible to track the different SLA for every team?
For every different team?
Yes.
Yes.
With the same issue.
Yes. You can have different goals. So the way SLAs are configured, you have goals that are derived from JQL. So you could specify the users in the goal and have a separate goal for each of them, and it'll count down individually for each of those.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you can check the assignee field, yeah.
I think that's all the time we have. If you have any additional questions, they can meet you outside of the room. But otherwise, please rate this session in the app. We'll really appreciate it. And Ship It is up next, so head on over. Thank you.